Hi, Robert. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Kyla.
So, first off, I want to talk about the candidates' economic messaging. So, both of them have kind of their economic elevator pitches, but how would you sum up Harris's economic messaging versus Trump's economic messaging?
Yeah. So I think Vice President Harris, first, she's only been the nominee for a short period. And I think the only policy speech that she's given to date has really been on the economy. And the way I would frame it is she's looking at how can hardworking Americans feel like they can get the American dream back again? And how can they get the opportunities to flourish and feel like the middle class just has this amazing capability to feel good each and every day after their hard day's work. And I think the way she framed it was four quadrants, and it made sense to me. It was home ownership. How do we get during this period where the supply demand is out of whack for home ownership back into a normal correlation for first time buyers. Secondly, she talked about food prices, or what I would say kitchen table issues. So making sure that, pricing that took place post COVID with inflation, gets back to normalcy. And she talked about things like price gouging, anti-collusion and competitiveness. The third part is healthcare, and certainly I think the way she framed it, the continuation of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, where currently 45 million Americans are on it, but 100 million Americans are using, the existence of pre-existing conditions through ACA. And then the fourth is, I'll call it childcare, but the idea that parents, whether firstborn or current children, that they have either the earned income tax credit or the ability just to make sure that they can give their children a great opportunity in life with education and health and everything else. So if those four quadrants, as a parent and as a hardworking American myself, makes sense to me. That was kind of the American dream that I worked hard for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for me, as a young person, home ownership is so important. And I subscribe to the housing theory of everything, where because people can afford homes, it's kind of the root of a lot of economic problems. But for you, when you look at these priorities, the quadrant, as you called it, that Harris laid out, what do you think is the top one that she should be messaging to voters?
I'm not sure that of those four, you can say one is more important than the other. I mean, those four, I think, is what everyone wants. And it's a framework of making sure everyone has, an opportunity to strive. So I wouldn't say one's more important than the other. What I would say, Kyla, is just take home ownership. I've been in finance for, 4 decades now. And this is kind of the first time I've seen that, this kind of lack of correlation between first-time buyers and existing homes. Usually first-time buyers buy existing homes. Now first-time buyers are looking for new homes because existing homes are not for sale for a few different reasons. Post-COVID, there's been a lack of supply. Post-COVID, we had interest rates go up. So those people who had a mortgage locked in didn't have the mobility to go sell their house and then get another low financing. And so we've had just this post-COVID environment that has really put supply and demand, completely out of whack. And I think her idea of, building 3 million homes over a period of time and working with home builders on that, it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's what we need to get done. Like, we have to start building homes if we want to address this problem. Is there anything that you would add to those four quadrants or any sort of messaging that you would change?
I think that's good for a framework as, like she says, call it the opportunity economy. I think she talks about it. I would also add, when I look at the Biden Harris administration, I think that in their 3.5, almost 4 years, they had some real policy wins, and they happen to be bipartisan. And I look at the infrastructure and the CHIPS Act, kind of from a combination perspective. But if you look at, I've always been a proponent of infrastructure. I've testified in front of the Senate on the need for a national infrastructure bank. I have written an op-ed on the need for, to proliferate infrastructure. Considering I think we're like a D or C minus when you get rated by engineers. But when I look at infrastructure, I'm like all encompassing. It's from next generation GPS, okay, to water treatment centers, to national electric grids, to high speed rail, to Wi-Fi in rural areas. So I look at the not just bridges and roads. And my view is they got the bipartisan infrastructure bill passed, and they got the CHIPS Act passed. And I think we should continue with kind of what I would call the revitalization of industrial America. So focus on that and make it almost like a 2.0. And if you look at some of their biggest, factory and manufacturing builds of the future, the Wisconsin, Microsoft plant, that would have been where Trump, had his famous golden shovel at Foxconn. That would never actually took place. But now you're building this AI Microsoft plant. If you look at the Intel chips plant being built in Arizona, or the battery plant and being built in Georgia, you have some real factories that are going to be built. And the way you see factories is we've had a comeback of factory building under the Biden-Harris administration. After you build the factory, then you build manufacturing, then you build distribution. And I think there's a whole, like I said, revitalization plan that's front and center that we should really just continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I do think like CHIPS Act, IRA, all of those things were so important to the Biden administration. And I'm curious how you think labor plays a part in that. Like, how do you think that we can train up people for all the factories that we're starting to build, the manufacturing that we're focusing on? What do you think that could look like, especially now that the labor market is weakening?
Yeah. I mean, skills training's the future, right? We have to make sure that whether people looking at trade schools or they look at, secondary education and colleges, that when they come out, that there are jobs ready to go. And, we're seeing this whole transformation back to almost industrial America, whether it has AI involved, so the intersection of what I would say, what we used to call in some ways, blue collar labor and technology labor is merging. And so I think we need to make sure that people, leaving school or leaving trade schools have the capability. And I think, if you look at unions and you look at what President Biden and Vice President Harris has done for unions, I mean, that's front and center for how they think of kind of fair labor. I think I saw a data point, which I thought was very interesting, was something like, before this administration, like 25% of the labor force was making $15 or less. And now it's something like only 11%. And what I would say is we underestimate that over the last 15 plus months that wages have outperformed inflation. That's a great thing. That means purchasing power is going up, and we don't spend enough time on that. That means the trend is great. That doesn't mean, the prices of inflation have all come down. It just means that now wages are starting to surpass that. The other thing I would say is when you look at infrastructure, I mean, those are the best paying jobs as well. I mean, you're talking about, much higher than middle class wages. when you get active in infrastructure. It's also an incredible multiplier of GDP. So there's a lot of really good things going on that we have to make sure that, the hardworking Americans are aware of. So when we ask people, how do they feel like there's something changing for the better of them. That's why I think Vice President Harris talked about the opportunity. People want to make sure that that opportunity for them exists.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there does feel like there's been, the death of the American dream to a certain extent. And I think for a lot of people, having that opportunity reinstated would be extraordinarily beneficial. And then, there is the question too of fiscal austerity. Neither candidate has addressed that. President Harris talked about it a little bit, I believe, with the child tax credit, that it would essentially pay for itself over time, which a lot of, infrastructure is the same way. But how do you think about the government debt situation, especially now the interest payments are so high because rates have been so high?
Yeah. Sometimes when I debate and or joke with my GOP friends, or sometimes I call them my frenemies joking, I tell them that I'm more fiscally conservative than where they've ever been. If you look at, during President Obama, during the continuing resolution fights, we had this thing called pay-fors, that if you wanted to do something, you had to pay for it. If you look at the last time there was a balanced budget in the government, and that was under President Clinton. So this idea that that the Republicans are fiscally conservative is a joke. The largest increase in debt was under former President Trump. It went up by 8+ trillion. That's double what it's gone up under Biden. This idea that, tax cuts were going to pay for themselves was one of the second biggest jokes. It didn't pay for themselves. This idea that they were going to have 5-6% GDP just never happened. I think they averaged 2+%, even if you take out the COVID year. So, neither side has been fiscally responsible. Debt keeps on growing. I think it should be a concern. I would love to see every congressperson get in line and vote up or down every piece of expenditures we have. My guess is no one would enter the House of the Congress on that day. My point is that everyone looks at their local needs and fights for them. And that's why they're, for the most part, that's why they're voted in. But I do think that we have to look at the bigger picture at some point and realize that this cannot continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think there's a path out of it? I think that's what I personally struggle with, is like, how do you even begin paying it down?
I mean, there are some possibilities that can keep chipping away. Obviously, the Trump tax cuts is going to be a big debate. My opinion is one thing, for example, did we need to go from 35% corporate tax rate right to 21? We probably could have been somewhere around 25 and 28, and corporate America would have been fine. We could also put in something like a global minimum tax of 15%. So if corporations are global in nature, they're not arbitraging tax systems. There are things that can help move the needle. And then I think you also just have to look at our annual budget with, very much more prescriptive and kind of stay, true to trying to get to some sort of balancing approach. But right now that just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And Harris did come out in support of Biden's tax plan, which does include unrealized capital gains tax, which a lot of people do not like. Could you just talk to the concept of the taxes that Harris came out in support of and what you think of them?
Yeah, so I'd like to say that I always raise my hand for everything the Democrats pitch, but that would be untrue since I've been on TV for almost 15 years. I don't support a wealth tax. I don't think that a wealth tax makes a lot of sense. I don't have an issue that if there are things we need to do post-COVID or for children or for elder care, if we have to raise taxes on the wealthy, so be it. That's part of us being an American. So I don't have an issue looking at income tax, looking at a more progressive tax. If you make X, maybe your rate's even higher. I'm not for this wealth tax where you're looking at assets or you're looking at unrealized stocks, because at the end of the day, we all know that stocks can go up or down, and housing can go up and down, artwork can go up and down, whatever they want to look at from a wealth tax. I'm also not for unrealized capital gains. I think that once again, the volatility of the stock market is too unpredictable. That's probably when I look at their tax reform. I would agree with a lot of what they're looking to do. That seems something I've been publicly saying that I don't support.
Yeah. And then with the no taxes on tips situation, do you think that's even feasible? We've been hearing it from both sides, which is a point of agreement. But what do you think of that proposal?
Well, what's interesting is neither side are the ones who came up with this. This was, I think, Ron Paul in 2006 came up with it first. And then in 2012, I actually think he wrote an opinion piece in like the Las Vegas Sun. I haven't done a lot of work on it. I know that the two former President Trump and Vice President Harris plans are not the same. I think Vice President Harris's plan is particular to a certain income threshold, as well as to hospitality. So it's not all tips and taxes throughout. I'd have to look more at it. It feels to me like it should be prescriptive. I'm not sure if that gets passed in the House. I don't know where that would come. But I do think we have to make the tax plan more fair. And so I think that type of instrument may make sense, but there needs to be a lot of work, because otherwise you'll have one-off gimmicks. People move around how they charge people and what's considered a tip versus income. And so I think it needs to be more prescriptive.
Yeah, people spend a lot of time optimizing their taxes. Yeah. Could you briefly talk about the economic issues in the swing states? Of course, that's where a lot of election energy is being focused. What do you think those states are most concerned about right now?
I mean, I think Americans are concerned about all the same things, whether you live in Georgia or Pennsylvania. You want to know that, your parents, elder care is front and center for so many of us as parents are living longer. I don't care whether you're a high income earner or middle or lower income earner. Everyone cares about their parents. That seems to be, just front and center for so many of us. Childcare. I think those are two of the bookends in this post-COVID world that are front and center for a lot of families. Education is critical. We need to make sure that young kids are getting a vibrant and smart education. So I think those are just things that work everywhere. Certainly, we have to make sure that prices come down. I mean, inflation has been long tail. We need to make sure that, whether it's insurance or housing or food, we have to just continue to work on those type of ideas. Right now, the best thing you can do is make sure people get paid more and more. And hopefully in this, what I'll call post-COVID world, now that supply chains are working again, companies start taking prices down. But that's a hard thing to do, because companies are paying higher wages and rents higher and insurance and higher, and all that gets passed through to the consumer. I know what I'm not supportive of is former President Trump talking about taking tariffs to 20% in a blunt way and thinking like that's not a tax on the consumer. I don't have an issue with tariffs when they're very isolated to something like steel dumping. But this broad-based approach, is a tax on the consumer. And I think former President Trump should get a tutorial from his economist what actually it is.
Yeah, there is overwhelming evidence that tariffs end up being passed to the consumer, and it doesn't make sense to try and use them to pay for things. But the odds markets have the candidates at 50-50. What do you think either candidate could do to tip the scales in their favor over the next few months? This is my final question, by the way.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, first of all, the betting markets is, on a daily basis. And we know if we looked at the betting markets, we would have had at one point President Romney, at another point President Hillary Clinton. And so they don't mean a lot. I do think, all joking aside, the next, 70 days is everything, right? Because that's then when the election, November 5th, or 74 days. My view is the real line in the sand starts on the debate day, September 10th. I think we'll have, all eyes on that. Both Vice President Harris and former President Trump will be in the room together, and they will have hopefully a debate that has real depth to it on the economy, on geopolitical risk, on immigration. Their differences could not be more stark. And I think that from that day on, that 60-day period, will have tens of billions of dollars, it seems like, going into 7 states, and there'll be 4 narratives. Vice President Harris doing ads on her vision, Vice President Harris doing ads hitting former President Trump, former President Trump doing ads on his vision, and former President Trump doing ads hitting Vice President Harris. Those 4 ads, I think, will play around the clock. And so I think that getting out your message is going to be incredibly important. All politics is local. So it's going to be really important about making those ads very bespoke to the area they play locally, making sure volunteers are knocking on doors. And I think just getting out, Vice President Harris and Governor Walz just needs to get out each and every day. And if you win the day, you're one step closer.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Yeah. One step at a time. That's awesome. Well, thank you, Robert. This has been a very informative conversation.
Thank you, Kyla. And I look forward to seeing, the outcome on November 5th. And I hope we see a Harris-Walz victory.